Greetings, viewers. Welcome to the True Patriot Podcast. Today, we are focusing on an issue of major concern. We've seen an influx of Chinese miners. We have taken over mining in Zimbabwe, but there are concerns about their conduct. We've seen the destruction of ecology. We've seen the destruction of livelihoods. We have seen workers dying at the workplace. So there are a lot of issues involved in as much as the nation is chasing what we are told is a 12 billion mining economy, but there are challenges associated with it. But today we want to focus on this particular issue to say what are the main challenges and how can we be able to solve them. To help me unpack or discuss this particular issue, I've invited Comrade Novizita Mlambo. Comrade Mlambo, I will allow you to introduce yourself and what you represent in greater detail.
Thank you. Revolutionary greetings, Comrade Obed Masaraure. Revolutionary greetings to your listeners, your viewers of the True Patriot Show. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm Ngobizita Mlambo. I am the National Coordinator of the Fight Inequality Alliance here in Zimbabwe. The Fight Inequality Alliance is a global movement that mobilizes grassroots organizations, activists, CBOs, to fight against inequality. If you are to recall that the major challenges that we face as a result of the prevailing capitalist crisis are that of inequality, poverty, and unemployment, particularly in the global south and in particular in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is the work that we do, organize communities, and we also offer thought leadership around how we can best tackle the challenge of inequality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we are hosting someone who is tackling this very important question. And we're not speaking of the issues of mining. Inequality can obviously be tackled if there is value chain justice along the the process. But maybe to begin with, what are you hearing about this influx of the Chinese? If there's, what are you gathering? What is happening in Zimbabwe generally from where you are sitting?
Yeah, thank you so much. From what we got on the ground from activists, community-based organizations, even individual people in mining areas, and from my own experiences in visiting areas like Bigita, I have come to the realization that there is a lot of mining activity that is being done by Chinese investors in Zimbabwe. But this investment is not only limited to lithium per se, for instance, which is the topical issue these days, but they have interests and investments in gold, in chrome as well, in different parts of the country. And the information we are gathering, what we have seen on the ground, number one, the environmental degradation that is coming up with the influx of Chinese mining activities in the country. But not only Chinese miners, even artisanal small-scale miners are also found in the want when it comes to the destruction that is done to the flora and fauna. For instance, in Bigita, the pollution of water. In Boera as well, the pollution of water. In Goromonzi, the pollution of water. In Manicaland, some parts of Manicaland, in Penalonga, for instance, the pollution of water sources. So that's one area. The second area is the farmer-miner conflict. As investment is coming into the country, as you indicated in the introductory remarks, that this country has a vision for Zimbabwe to have a mining sector that is worth 12 billion. So as the government and the responsible authorities try to drive this vision of having a 12 billion mining sector by 2030, you realize that there's a lot of land grabbing that's involved in the process. And you have seen communities in different parts of the country, especially farmer communities, peasant-based communities who rely on agricultural land or for subsistence farming to sustain their livelihoods, being removed from their areas of operation of farming simply because the prevailing Mines and Minerals Act indicates that mining takes precedence over every other thing. So if a mineral is discovered on your piece of land, you have to be compensated at law. But what we have seen in some cases, if not most of the cases, is the displacement, forced displacement of our people without adequate compensation. So you realize that there's a conflict between those who intend to do mining, especially lithium, and the investment that the Chinese are bringing vis-a-vis locals, in particular in Bikita, for instance, who have for centuries relied on that land for agricultural purposes. So you can see that part of the problem is that when they are forced from their land, their ancestral land, the attachment that they have their land to that land, in particular for agriculture, to sustain their lives, is compromised, and it becomes a social and economic injustice. So that's another area that we have realized, Comrade Open. The third component is the ecological debt, right? With mining comes a lot of disturbance to the environment, right? The methods that are used, if you are aware, and the viewers are aware that, for instance, lithium mining involves a lot of digging and a lot of blasting, right? And the use of a lot of water. So what you realize that there is a lot of digging, a lot of environmental degradation, and that leaves an ecological debt, not to the mining corporation, not to the mining companies, but to the host communities who host these mines. So in instances where some mines have been decommissioned, or in instances where mining has been done and the investor has left, you realize that there is a lot of what we call holes, large pits, which are affecting not only human beings in this instance, but also livestock. A lot of reports in particular raw areas where mining has been done are cattle falling into pits because the miner left the open pits out without covering them. So there's a lot of ecological debt that is associated with the extractivist model of mining that we see in the country. The fourth component that we see on the ground, and for that what we hear from people who are in these communities, are that because corporate social responsibility is not legislated at law in the Mines and Minerals Act as it stands currently, which is undergoing a process of reform, you realize that it is mining companies who, at their discretion, can either choose to do corporate social responsibility initiatives in communities. So if there's no legal binding mechanism that forces mining companies to actually invest in the communities that they are extracting the minerals from, the problem we are seeing is that there's limited investment in terms of return, in terms of, i.e., the building of schools, the building of clean, the building of hospitals, the provision of safe, clean, and potable water, even the revenue that rural district councils and local authorities where the mining is taking place, the revenue that they can get is not primarily adequate for the socio-economic transformation of this community. So corporate social responsibility is something that is left at the mercy, if I'm to use that way, of the investor, and not necessarily something which is required at law. And one of the reforms that we are calling for is that corporate social responsibility, community ownership, trust, as well as community beneficiation from the mining that is taking place in host communities should be legislated in the Mines and Minerals Amendment Bill that is current, that was gazetted recently by the government, but that has been a subject of debate since 2007. Debate of what? Of reform. The fifth component are illicit mineral outflows. There are reports of a lot of leakages of particular lithium and other minerals that we are seeing in communities that host these important minerals, so-called critical minerals like your lithium, right? So these illicit leakages of minerals is not only depriving the state or the government of the much needed revenue to transform the economy, to transform the socio-economic status of the people, but it is also affecting the host communities themselves, because where there is illicit dealings of minerals, there's violence. Where there's illicit dealings of minerals, you find that there is also abuse of cultural and traditional practices of areas, the desecration of sacred graves, the desecration of predominantly traditional mountains where our chiefs, our kings are to be buried or used to be buried, the desecration of ancestral land that we kept and preserved as part of our nature as Africans through myths, superstitions that managed to preserve our mountains, which are now being degraded in areas like your Boterekwa, in areas like your Goromons, in areas like your Bikita, where they've destroyed mountains and stuff like that. So these are some of the issues that are emerging from communities. The last but not least issue is the issue of child marriages. And this I heard when I went to Bikita in July. Community members were complaining that with the influx of a lot of people interested in getting employment or seeking employment at Bikita lithium, at Bikita minerals, right? A lot of people are coming in, having access to some few resources in terms of money, and then lowering school going children, in particular females, into sexual relationships and compromising their future. So that's another untold story of the effects of mining, especially in the so-called critical mineral sector, i.e., lithium in our case. So that's another area that, if there is to be advocacy and reform, people really need to hammer on the issue of child marriages, as well as unwanted and unforeseen pregnancies that our female or our children or women are experiencing in mining areas. Remember, mining is taking place in areas which are predominantly poor and poverty ridden and inequality ridden. So the moment someone has access to money, they can manipulate young ladies in our community. So these are some of the effects of Chinese investment, but not only Chinese investment in mining, but even artisanal small-scale miners who are also mining in these areas and other players. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for that detailed input. But let me get you back to the issue of the environment. Let's dwell more on the environment now. Where is EMA? Because we understand that in other jurisdictions, like in Zambia, licenses for companies are revoked if you conduct your business in a way that can destroy the environment. But we have seen the massive destruction of our ecology. But the regulatory body seems to be absent. What is happening? Why is EMA missing in action?
So the major issue in Zimbabwe is that the laws are clear. The laws that govern the environment and the laws that establish EMA are clear. But the major problem, comrade, is the absence of enforcement. One of the major problems is enforcement of the already existing laws that before you do mining, you need to get an environmental impact assessment done. Firstly, before you do any exploration, any digging, you must, and EMA does that, right? That's the first point. The second point is that if there is corruption in the mining sector, as reported by the Central report, as reported by various media houses, you realize that if there is corruption in the sector, chances are that a lot of mining companies who are destroying the environment are to go scot-free. Why? Because there's a lot of corruption. The third point is the issue of politics, politically exposed mining companies, which are linked to the ruling establishment or the ruling elite. So that then compromises the work of EMA. If a miner or an investment company claims that we were given approval by the ruling elite to mine in the country, it then challenges the authority of the environmental management agents. So political interference then compromises the work of EMA. So on paper, EMA is aware of what it's supposed to do. The law is clear of what EMA is supposed to do. But not only EMA, there is a whole parliamentary portfolio committee, right, on mines and mining development. And that committee is supposed to play an oversight role over the Ministry of Mines, over the mining operations in the country. But you realize that the Environment Committee again becomes toothless. Why? Because of how mining companies and corporations are politically connected. So mining, comrade, is not cannot be separated in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, not only Zimbabwe, cannot be separated from politics and the role that ruling elites play in convergence with mining corporations. So that's the challenge that we have, that the model we use is extractivist in nature, right? And since it's extractivist in nature, you can have the best policies on paper, but so long as politics is involved in determining who does the mining, who gets the mining contract, then it becomes a problem. It also becomes a problem, right, if your parliament is not as effective as we would love it to be, because you would expect parliament to then summon EMA, the committee, to summon EMA and have EMA explain the degradations, the human rights violations, as well as the leakages that I spoke about earlier on that are happening in the mining sector. But again, as you are aware, the state of our parliament currently and the politics that is at play. So, Emma, yes, at law, it is mandated to make sure that the environment is taken care of, the pits are covered after mining is done, people, mining companies or individuals who intend to do mining first do environmental impact assessment, and they're given a certificate to that effect. But as I have argued, that so long as there's no enforcement, so long as there's no political will, then all these things will remain on paper, and everyone will continue to complain about Emma without discussing the elephant in the room, which is politics. Is the politics stupid, as someone would say?
Okay, yeah, thanks for bringing the issue of politics. Now, there are some suggestions that maybe Zimbabwe is trapped into Chinese debt, and maybe our politicians are now behaving like a comprador, just parceling whatever is available to the Chinese because they've already. How is the issue of debt linked to this unregulated mining?
Yeah, it is related actually, because
Mm.
our biggest bilateral credit is China. And these are not my figures. If you check the Ministry of Finance, the website, there's what they call the Zimbabwe Public Debt Management Office. Within that office, they publish what is called the debt bulletins. And the most recent debt bulletin, public debt bulletin, indicates that our biggest bilateral creditor is China. We owe the Chinese 2 billion United States dollars in debt. So that's the first point to note. When you look at the nature of Chinese investments in mining, for instance, their behavior and their conduct, as well as its intersectionality with the debt question and the debt crisis in Zimbabwe. So if Zimbabwe owes the Chinese 2 billion US dollars, right? So that therefore means that whatsoever decision our government makes, and this is subject to speculation because we do not know. Our parliament has not done enough work to scrutinize Comrade Obed, what are called resource-based loans. Organizations like the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCOD, have produced the reports that indicate that part of the reason why the Chinese are behaving the way they're doing in our mining sector, in our especially this important sector, is because of what are called the resource-based loans. What are resource-based loans? They argue that some of the loans or the debt we owe to China is backed by resources, mineral resources. So that's the linkage between indebtedness and Chinese investment in our mining sector. So there is a direct link between why, one, the public debt crisis, two, the nature of the investment, and the lack of political will to actually sanction the Chinese by our own government, possibly because of the resource-based loans that they signed with the Chinese. These are coming back to haunt them. But our parliament is silent because, as we said earlier on, the nature of our parliament is that of a politically polarized parliament. A politically polarized parliament that also weaponizes a section in the constitution that recalls parliamentarians. So there's no MP across the political divide at this point who is willing to go deep and investigate these so-called resource-based loans because of the whipping system. But Section 327 of our constitution actually says before the government of Zimbabwe enters into any agreement that places a fiscal obligation on Zimbabwe, it must be passed, either approved or disapproved by parliament. So what will happen is maybe in the future, the not so distant future, when a forensic public debt audit is done, which is something that we are advocating for, that Zimbabwe needs a forensic debt audit so that the debt is audited independently and transparently by parliament, civil society, and our creditors, the Chinese, the Paris Club of Lenders, the IMF, the World Bank. If we have a holistic and inclusive official forensic public debt audit, it is only then that we will be able to unearth the real extent of which our public resources have been mortgaged for in exchange for loans from the Chinese or any other economic players from where we are borrowing. Why? Because remember, Zimbabwe already is in debt distress. We are owing 21.5 billion US dollars in debt. And this is figures from the mid-term budget statement presented by the Minister of Finance recently on 31st of July, if I'm not mistaken. So we're a bad debtor. No one wants to borrow us money. So what then happens is that we end up using our resources to mortgage our future. We borrow and securitize the borrowing using our resources. That's why we call them resource-based loans. Number two, we don't have access to concessional financing. So if we don't have access to concessional financing are loans that have cheaper interest rates, loans that are not vicious in nature. We end up going for non-concessionary loans. And non-concessionary loans are very expensive loans. These are loans that you find being given by voucher funds, by commercial players, and shadowy characters globally. So you find that you then end up having minerals being used as security. So we are calling for a forensic debt audit in Zimbabwe. That would then unearth the relationship between why the Chinese are degrading our environment, why the Chinese are abusing workers, why the Chinese are going scot-free with the abuse they are doing in the mining sector. Maybe, probably, it is because of the 2 billion we owe them, and there might have been a deal signed outside parliamentary approval, which we are not aware of, which explains the lackadaisical approach or the laissez-faire approach that our government is doing towards the Chinese.
Thank you so much for clearly unpacking the linkage between the debt issue and the irresponsible mining activities. Now, if you're going to be looking at resources like lithium, we know that
Right.
the electric vehicles are the next thing, and the Chinese seem to be leading this process. And at the end of the day, there is no doubt about it that there is high value for lithium. But now we go back to the villager who has been displaced, who was supposed to have a small field to grow their own maize for subsistence. We are no longer able to do that. How do we, in your own view, ensure that, with regardless of all these challenges, the villager in Bikita can still at least have a livelihood, out get something out of the export of their own lithium? What kind of interventions could be put in place, regardless of all these challenges, to say the high value lithium that will end up being an electric vehicle, in an electric vehicle, so that in the village they also get something from that kind of product? What can be done? What kind of interventions?
That's a very good question. So remember, Zimbabwe is a predominantly agro-based economy, and mining plays number two in terms of the role, the contributions to overall gross domestic product. So it's an important sector. So the answer to your question lies primarily in the matter of industrialization. But industrialization is not an event. Industrialization is a process, but that process requires deliberate steps. The first one is consultation. Section 13, if I'm not mistaken, of the Zimbabwean Constitution is clear. No development plans or policies are supposed to be done by the government without the involvement of the people in their one, design, two, implementation, three, monitoring and evaluation. So consult the people in those areas where lithium is being mined, Goromons, Bikita, Boere, and some other parts of the country. That's very important. Sit down with the traditional leaders, sit down with the villagers, sit down with teachers, opinion leaders, ordinary persons. Sit down with them. This is the investment we want to get into the country. This is the mineral. What does it mean to have lithium? Because most of the people are not aware of the value of the lithium. So the development of the industrial policy, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce in this country is currently in the process of developing Zimbabwe's industrialization policy. The Ministry of Finance, in operation with other ministries, they're in the process of developing the National Development Strategy number 2. The Ministry of Mines has already shared the $12 billion mining vision. So we need to see harmonization, first at policy level. Minister of Industry, Minister of Finance, Minister of Mines, working in tandem with, and most importantly, the Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education. Because we need to see investment in research and development. And that investment requires money from the Minister of Finance. And that Minister of Finance gets the money from the revenue it gets from taxing royalties from the mining sector and stuff like that. So, first of all, let there be coordination among government ministries and departments, and then sit down with the people, consult them, and come up with a robust lithium policy that speaks to Zimbabwe needs a lithium policy, a critical mineral. So the UK, for instance, has a critical mineral strategy for that net zero 2050 target. That's why you see their lackadaisical approach to Zimbabwe. That's why you see the British Minister for African Affairs visiting Zimbabwe and meeting the President of Zimbabwe. Because Britain wants the lithium to fast track its process towards an economically just a country, a net zero country. So we need our own lithium policy. Number one. Number two, you cannot talk about the just transition without indicating justice to the people who will be affected by the extraction of that lithium, which will lead to a just transition. So we need a just transition that is people-centered. So it's people and planet before profits. The government needs to think of the people, the climate, the planet, or the environment before profits. That's very, very important. Because once you have that thinking, which is human development oriented in nature, the next thing you're going to do is that when you negotiate for the investment in the lithium sector, you're going then to say, we are not going to agree to a deal that says we will export raw lithium. We are not going to agree to a deal that says there will not be local content development and the retooling, reskilling of our workers. And if their workers are not skilled, the skilling of our workers. So for you to have downstream industries in Bigita, in Boera, in Goromonzi, where you find the manufacturing of lithium ion batteries, for instance, you need technical colleges in those areas first that are funded by the revenues we get from the mining sector itself, so that you build those facilities and you train your people. Or you negotiate when you are negotiating with the mining companies, you say, why don't you train our people first? Why should you take the lithium in its raw state and take it to China and produce the batteries? Why not have the factory here? And if you are saying our engineers are not skilled enough, why not partner with the School of Mines so that you open a branch or a department of the School of Mines in Bigito where the lithium is done? You can do those as pilot studies, right? In Goromonzi, in Buer, in Bigit. And the School of Mines partners with this investment, the Chinese who are investing in the lithium sector, right? That's how you can then create downstream industries to industrialize. But this is not only limited to mining the lithium only, and to then say we are banning the exporting of raw lithium ore. We want to add value and industrialize in the process. Think of the value chain. It's not everyone in Bigito and Goromonzi or in Buera who wants to work or who has the skills to work in a mine, a lithium mine. But if you are to industrialize at downstream level, there are other components of the value chain that are important. There are those who make the helmets, the overalls, the gumboots that are needed for those who will be mining the lithium. You get the point. There are those who are supposed to make the boats and nuts for the lorries that will be extracting the lithium.
Hello, comrade. I seem to have lost you there, comrade Blabo. Hello, comrade Blabo. Oh, we seem to have lost Comrade Mlambo there. Let me try to re-add him as he was explaining the value chain for lithium and related industries that can also provide employment to the people along the value chain. Comrade Mlambo, are you there? Hello, Comrade Mlambo. Fellow viewers, feel free to add your own ideas to the message section. We will be able to take your ideas into our future programming and part of our advocacy as we try to continue to push for value chain justice to ensure that the communities where the extraction is taking place, the people are not left out, to ensure that the environment is not destroyed and livelihoods are protected. And to digest that particular issue, we have Comrade Mulambo here, who is sharing his perspectives. Comrade Mulambo, you feel free to join. So as I'm trying to reconnect with Comrade Mulambo, feel free to post your questions, which we'll take into account. as we do plan for more advocacy around this issue. We've seen Zimbabwe reporting exports of lithium of around $674 million. The question always then comes to mind to say, is that worth it? Looking at the environmental degradation, looking at the livelihoods that have been robbed from our people. People have lost their land, they've lost ancestral land that we used for agriculture. Even graves have been removed, and other areas which we thought were so special within our cultural context. We have lost all that, but is the 674 million worth it, even if you're going to be looking at the final value of that particular product when the lithium is processed, the ore is processed, and it then becomes part in a component which is almost 40% of the electric vehicle. Are we getting enough? Are we not being shortchanged? Those are the issues we are discussing with Comrade Mulambo here, and we are still waiting for him to rejoin us into this particular conversation to hear or more from him on his own perspectives and what is the role of devolution to try to address some of these issues. Because we feel like the communities plans are being made in Harare and imposed in the different communities, but those who make plans, they are doing it for their selfish reasons. Some of them will simply take a bribe and they don't know, they live the realities of the people in the context where the mining is going to take place. So what is the role maybe of devolution, for example, in trying to address some of these issues? Welcome back, Comrade Mulambo.
Thank you so much. Apologies for the slight hiccup.
I know we totally understand. These are some of the challenges we have to deal with. So you were explaining well the issue of the value chain, including the related industries that can obviously absorb people for employment, and how that can be done to also boost the local economies. And then maybe Comrade Mlambo, if you could quickly switch to the issue of devolution. We understand devolution is provided for by the Constitution, Section 264, but we do not have a devolution act. So in the event that Zimbabwe is now crafting a devolution act, how can we protect these locals and also ensure that they are part of the planning, they are part of the monitoring, and that they don't lose out to these foreign investors? How, if we were going to produce a devolution act, what would you prescribe as a way to enhance value chain justice for these locals?
Yeah, the first thing is the devolution act should be people-centric. It should put people at the center. You cannot have devolution that putting people at the center. So number one, local authorities will have to make decisions, right, on their own without the interference of central government. That's the first point. Local authorities must be able to negotiate as well, with support, of course, from central government when the negotiations for these mining deals are done. Because local authorities are there to represent the people. And as I said earlier on, development must not be done in Zimbabwe outside the people, because the constitution says any policy or plan to develop anywhere in Zimbabwe must involve the people. So the devolution framework that we are anticipating or actually lobbying for or calling for is a devolution piece of legislation that puts the people at the center and empowers local authorities at law, so that local authorities, environmental management agency, and the people have that power to then say you cannot do mining in this district because you don't have an environmental impact assessment. You don't have a clear plan of employing locals. Because that should be clearly stated in the Devolution Act that where mining activities are done in any area in Zimbabwe, there should be a provision that the locals should be employed in that sector. And where locals are not found in that sector who are suitable with the suitable skills, the investor working in conjunction with the local authority and central government must ensure that there is a technical vocational training center that's constructed in the area so that people are skilled. And where others have become redundant, workers have become redundant because of changes in technology, right? There should be reskilling of the workers. So that needs to be clear. Two, the protection of workers' rights should also be part and parcel of the Devolution Act. Why? Because the mining sector as well has been notorious for serious worker rights violations, right? So we must have a devolution act that also clearly states that the labor rights provided for in the Constitution of Zimbabwe and other pieces of legislation which are consistent with the Bill of Rights are also included in that devolution piece of legislation. Three, issues to do with revenues. If there's devolution, then the Devolution Act should clearly state that in areas where there are mining activities happening, revenues sourced from mining activities should be channeled to the local authority, a share of those revenues, another share to central government. Why? Because it is only through access to revenue that then local authorities are able to do what? Provide public social services. You get the sense. To ensure that the roads are built, clinics are built, schools are built, streets have street lights, rural areas are urbanized or rural areas are developed, right? You cannot continue to have a scenario where you have mining, the mining of a critical mineral like lithium happening, yet the people in that very same area don't have decent housing. If you have devolution, therefore means the local authority have that authority at law using that act to work directly with the mining company or an investor of whatever they are called to ensure that revenues that are part of the revenues from the mining sector or from that which is being mined are channeled toward social protection, toward public health care, toward rehabilitation of roads, construction of new roads, construction of, you know what, in Bikita, when I went there, they were saying we do not have leisure centers. We do not have recreational facilities. The local football team in Bikita uses Sakuva Stadium as their home ground. Yet they travel from Masvingo to Mutare as their home ground for football. But there's a lot of talent, footballing talent. So imagine if the Devolution Act clearly states that part of the revenues raised from the mining royalties, which will go to the local authority, should be channeled toward the construction of recreational facilities. It therefore means job creation as well for the locals. It therefore means that the untapped talent, football, tennis, swimming, cricket talent, that is not tapped because the infrastructure is not there, is equally tapped. So a devolution framework that encompasses all these things, it must be human rights centered and human development centered. In this sense, I'm saying the Devolution Act must have a human development approach, not just to devolve power for the sake of devolving it, but with the human development in mind, so that no one is left behind in terms of development.
Yeah, it did. Then there's also an issue to say we are getting royalties from these companies, and those royalties are just a drop in the ocean.
Mm,
And in the past, we've toyed around with the idea of indigenization. But at that particular point, we were indigenizing to the extent of giving a percentage of shares to an individual, but nothing to
mm,
the state. But people are
mm,
now looking at models like in Botswana, what they're doing with their diamond, to say the state get a good percentages. And I'm glad at some point you mentioned the issue of the workers, empowering the workers. What would be your take around rethinking nationalization? To what extent can we nationalize our minerals? Because these are finite
mm,
resources. Very soon we won't be having this lithium, and we should be able to maximize when we still have it. We should be not in a hurry to offload it.
mm.
To what extent can we nationalize? What model do you propose which benefit the state so that the state has capacity to deliver services, but also empowering the workers who are employed by those particular corporates?
So we are of the view that the state should have its own mining companies, right? We are of the view that a nationalization of strategic minerals, if not the entire mining sector, is the best foot forward. However, we are aware that mining is capital intensive. Mining is very capital intensive. You need lots of money to do mining. So you then need a state that is developmental in nature, right? You don't need a state which is primitive in nature. You don't need a state which is captured by a few at the expense of the many. So yes, to the nationalization of our minerals. So because they are ours anyway, and they are finite, as you correctly said. However, the state has to be a capable developmental state. It therefore means that for a state to be capable to be developmental, it must be manned or led by a political leadership and a bureaucracy that is competent. And models globally are there: the South Korean model, the Singaporean model, right? The Indonesian model, the East Asian Tigers models are there. In development economics, is what we call learning by doing, right? And avoiding the mistakes of the past, right? So we can learn from best experiences that happen in East Asia and discard that which didn't work. So we are for the nationalization of our mines, but in the competent running of state-owned mining companies. There's nothing that should stop the Zimbabwean state from investing in an SOE that does mining in this country. But what we need are competent bureaucrats and a competent political leadership that is not necessarily interested in the primitive accumulation of money, but in the developmental transformation of the country. So nationalization works if you have competent people who do that particular mining. Not only the nationalization of mining itself, but the nationalization of strategic sectors of the economy. Because we are of the view that a developmental state is what is needed in underdeveloped countries. We cannot leave everything to capital, because capital is primarily interested in the extraction of profits, in the maximization, extraction of minerals and the maximization of profits at the lowest cost possible. Hence why the human rights violations. So nationalization will protect workers. Nationalization also means that we industrialize, because when you nationalize, your plan is not just to nationalize, but it's to industrialize. And when you industrialize, you create employment. When you create employment, people have access to wages. When people have access to decent wages, you increase what we call aggregate demand in the economy. And when there's aggregate demand in the economy, it means money is circulating in the economy. If money is circulating in the economy, because people are employed, they have disposable income, it therefore means that the state has the capacity to collect revenue through pay as you earn, income tax. So at the end of the day, the challenge of revenue collection that the Minister of Finance was talking about in the midterm review, that revenue to GDP dropped to 15%, can only be solved if we own our mines through our state-owned mining companies, and we competently run them, and we create employment through downstream industrialization, and we create jobs. That's the only way we can increase the revenue to GDP ratio, because we'll be collecting revenue domestically, what we call domestic resource mobilization. So yes to the nationalization of our mines, yes to the nationalization of strategic sectors of the economy, but you need a competent bureaucracy, you need a competent political leadership that will usher in a developmental state.
That's very critical. Maybe if you could just briefly, looking at the state of the Zimbabwean state right now, what critical
Mm,
steps you could take towards strengthening our
mm,
state, so that our state has become so weak that we can't even do simple
mm,
things. We rely on tenders for almost everything.
mm, mm.
Just basic steps on how we could strengthen the Zimbabwean state.
I think
Uh,
the first, yeah, the first port of call is, let's look at our state-owned enterprises model, right? Our state-owned, how many state, because a majority of the state-owned enterprises are now part of Mutapa investment fund. And I went to a breakfast meeting where the CEO of Mutapa was saying that I think 80% of SOEs are under Mutapa, right? And a majority of them are loss making. Then the argument is state-owned enterprises are not supposed to be profit making. The first thing for Zimbabwe is the thinking. It needs to shift. SOEs are not for profit. So that's one critical step, to understand that SOEs are not for profit. Rather, they are for public services, the provision of public services. They should just be operated in a way that is competent. Don't steal from the SOEs. Man them with competent people. Make sure that our constitution is clear anyway on how corporate governance, on how SOEs are supposed to what I can basically say is to the government, implement the constitution on what it says on how SOEs are supposed to be managed. Number two, Zimbabwe is losing a lot of money to illicit financial flows, my brother. The National Prosecuting Authority, the highest officer in the National Prosecuting Authority, who is the Prosecutor General, indicated that we are losing 100 million United States dollars every month due to gold leakages, illicit financial flows, illicit leakages in the gold sector alone. So the Zimbabwean state has to make sure that its security agencies nip in the bud the leakages of 150 million per month in gold alone. We're not talking about lithium, chrome, and other illicit dealings cross-border dealings that happen on our borders, which are porous, right? So CARE illicit financial flows, 150 million per month, that's around 1.5 billion annually. If you have 1.5 billion and you put it into Zisco Steel, a state-owned entity, you put it into Zino, you put it into a mining company, then you say we are going to purchase a caterpillars from South Africa. So in South Africa, they manufacture those heavy industrial mining duty equipment and machinery. Already you are in the context of the Africa Free Continental Trade Area issues, trade between ourselves as Africans. So you support South Africa, the machinery making industry in South Africa, to promote the Zimbabwean-owned, state-owned mining company. So CARE illicit financial flows, that's where you can get the money to capitalize your state-owned enterprise, right? Number three, make sure that there's rule of law, right? Because if people are caught stealing, recently the police wrote on Twitter, the ZRP, that they caught a car with human beings, Zimbabweans, were trying to smuggle gold, which is worth 1.5 million US dollars. Imagine if those people were publicly shown on their faces going to the magistrate's court in Harare, and a serious, heavy jail sentence was imposed on them, and they're actually arrested. Do you think anyone would have the guts to steal from the country? You see, so allow the rule of law, which is in our constitution, in the founding values in chapter 2, that Zimbabwe is based on the principle of rule of law. So if you have rule of law, you will make sure that you deal decisively with corruption. Because the South Koreans that we were speaking about earlier on, when they were under General Park, we introduced the developmental state model. If you were caught stealing, you were executed. In China, if you are caught stealing public funds, you are executed. Whether I've seen in the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee meetings or Politburo meetings, high-ranking Chinese Communist Party officials being plugged out by the police and arrested during a session of the Chinese Communist Party meeting. That's their determination towards fight. Because if you want your state to be capable, arrest those who are stealing. Make sure that the judiciary is independent, there's rule of law, people are prosecuted, they are sent to jail for stealing, and you have enough resources now to then say let's invest in this company. Let's invest in buying machinery. Let's invest in research and development, something which we didn't talk about at length. Research and development, R&D, because one of the areas where mining can also help create other value chains is R&D. But you can't have R&D if you don't have money to invest in the School of Mines, at NAST, at the University of Zimbabwe, at SIRDC. You need R&D. But to have R&D, you need money. Because technology, the patents are expensive. You are a scientist yourself. You know how expensive science is. So you need to invest a lot of money. So imagine if we plug that which we are losing. Number 4, which is the last point. The Zimbabwean state has to be deliberate when it comes to industrialization. We can never overemphasize the importance of industrialization. Our state is weak primarily because it relies on windfalls from commodity price booms. But when commodity prices are low, there is not enough revenue. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. They recently told us that gold prices are up, right? And the gold sector has contributed over 437 million in the first 6 months of the year. Lots of foreign currency coming in. A capable state would then ring fence that revenue and say, this is for value addition in the gold sector. We are going to make sure that we create a small industry where we add value to our gold. Then we don't export them. Because there will come a time when gold prices are down. There will come a time when lithium prices are down. So this state needs to be capable in terms of deliberately identifying areas of industrialization during periods of commodity booms where we have enough forex. Let's then use that forex to channel it towards industrializing and creating value chains in the sectors where the mining is taking place. That's how we can deal with the Dutch disease, or what they call the natural resource case.
Brilliant. So now towards a developmental state, what is the role of the ordinary person? We are stuck here. We still have these villagers who are stranded in Bikita, in Zaka.
Mm.
Is your parting shots? And with your parting shots, we've seen people camping at the US Embassy demanding the end of sanctions, among others.
Yes.
And we are stuck in this place and we want to go towards a developmental state. What is the role of the ordinary person to take us there at the moment?
The ordinary person, you are armed with the Constitution. The Constitution gives you rights to exercise your displeasure, right? To petition, right? To peacefully protest, right? To do picketing, as the University of Zimbabwe lecturers are picketing right now, right? As you said, people were picketing at the embassy. It's exercising that freedom to freely express yourself peacefully. Now, that's very, very important to know your rights and exercise the rights that you're provided for in the Constitution as an ordinary village. The second point is community-based organizations should continue to mobilize people at grassroots level, because the power that CBOs have is that they are in communities. So the third component is traditional leaders. Do not sell your ancestral land. Do not sell your people. Do not sell your people. Traditional leaders must stand firm and defend their environment. But they can only do so if they are in sync with the people. So those what development committee meetings, those full council meetings where ordinary villagers, ordinary citizens attend, they are important sites of struggle. Because it is in those spaces that are already available where citizens should actually be going there in numbers and say, wait a minute, we elected you into council, into this road district council. What are you doing to stop the pollution that's happening? We are not going to leave this council hall or this council chamber unless and until we agree that you're going to stop the mining operations that are happening in that mining company X, because they are raping our kids, they are impregnating our people, they are violating our traditional and cultural rights, they are degrading our environment. Citizen agency. So the moment we stop organizing and mobilizing ourselves in our communities, we have lost the plot. Lastly, the message the people of Zimbabwe, in particular the government of Zimbabwe, do not lose this opportunity as the world transitions towards a just a society which is financed, which is led actually or propelled by the so-called green minerals. Zimbabwe is the largest owner of lithium in Africa, and among the top 6 in the world of lithium reserves and mines in the world. Government needs to know that we have a strategic advantage. If we say no to lithium mining today, there will be chaos in the value chain globally because we are a big player. So government has to be deliberate, at least start industrialization downstream in the lithium sector and see how it goes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having you, Brother Mlambo. It was great to be discussing the linkages between debt and the destruction of the environment, the linkage, how to build a strong developmental state, encouraging citizen agents, the possibility of nationalization, encouraging constitutionalism, among other issues. And there you have it, viewers. The boy is still in your court as an ordinary person. You are armed with your constitution, as Comrade Mulambo says. If you exercise your right, use spaces that are available, continue to demand value chain justice as we protect our ecology, as we demand more from the sale of our minerals, as we take on our government, demanding more accountability, demanding that they plug all the leakages. Thank you so much, Comrade Mulambo, for joining us for this important conversation.
Thank you very much.